Hi, this is Jason with RPC Electronics, and in this short lesson, we're going to talk about layer manipulation in EagleCAD. And layers seem to be either a very daunting thing to some people or very simple. So, if you think you have the hang of it, then you may not need this video. But for some, it may prove to be useful. In Eagle, we all know after working on our first project that we have multiple layers that have to do with any board. The most common or the most well known would be your top copper layer, your bottom copper layer, and if you have a silkscreen layer, then that would be any markings on the board that are not part of the copper layers. Are usually done in some kind of silk screening, and in this case all of our silk screens indicated in yellow. So what we're looking at right now is our board from the 12 lesson long project board, and essentially right now we're looking at all layers turned on. That's all of our copper layers, all of our cream layers, stop layers, our silk screens, everything. For starters, I'm going to simplify this, and we're going to go into our layers menu, and we're just going to leave on basically the bare minimum. That would be the top, the bottom. These route layers would be if you have 4-layer board. In this case we don't, so it doesn't matter if they're on or off. Our pads, our vias, and then we can leave dimension on if we want to, but really our yellow silkscreen outline is really taking the place of that dimension for us. So we're going to click and hold and then drag our mouse down, and if we do that, we'll essentially turn off all the layers. Sometimes it'll catch that last bottom silk, sometimes it won't. But now that I've done that, if I click OK, you'll see that essentially our entire board has been simplified to the point where we're almost unsure of what is what. So we'll go back into our layers menu and let's turn on our silks. Okay, so now we have our top layer silk, and we can see our board a little bit better. We know where all of our parts are now. It's a lot easier to see. In some cases, you might have a fairly complex board where you want to look at specific traces, whether they're on the bottom or the top layer, and we can do that easily by turning off our layers, our top or bottom layer. For example, let's turn off the top layer. Click OK. Now we're looking at our bottom layer, and if I was to turn off our bottom layer, that would turn off everything, all of our copper, top and bottom. So let's turn our top back on, and as you can see, all of our traces, other than a couple of small traces here, are all contained on our bottom layer. So let's go back and we'll turn off the top, turn the bottom back on, and now we can see our major traces as part of the bottom layer. This is especially helpful, like I said, when you have a very complex board and you need to differentiate between traces associated with one part on the top or the bottom. Sometimes you need to have a layout of where all your soldering is going to be. Sometimes this may be for a pick and place machine if it's through hole. There is several cases. With a through hole part or through hole board, your top stop and bottom stop layers, that's layers 29 and 30, if we turn those both on, we're now going to see this thatch kind of pattern over all of our pads as well as our vias. I can go and turn off everything but those two as well as the silks, and now we have strictly a drawing or a viewing of where all of our pads are. But this does include our holes as well. Any holes in the board, that would be these two corner mounting holes as well as the mounting hole for the regulator. So let me go and turn everything back on, and you can see where those layers stayed in addition to all the new layers. But now if I go and look at a surface mount version of this board, I've essentially duplicated the same design and surface mount. You can see that all of our traces are on the top layer now, and we can show that by, first of all, let's turn off everything that we don't need. Let's turn off the bottom, and then let's turn off the top. Obviously everything's gone away, so let's turn the bottom back on. And you can see that we virtually have a solid ground plane on the bottom because all of our surface mount traces are on the top. So we'll turn the top back on. Sometimes with surface mount, especially if you're going to have, for example, a solder paste stencil made, you need to show and you need to indicate where those points need to be on the solder stencil, and we use the top and bottom cream layer for that. So if I turn that on, you can now see all these areas that are shown now. That's all areas that would be bare metal or for the pads, and the stencil would actually have those areas cut out where the solder paste would be applied. Now if I turn off everything but those layers, again we can see even better now. Here's where all of our pads are. Now when we're manipulating these layers, sometimes there's some common views that we need to see throughout the process of designing the board. In one case, I typically like to use the top, bottom, pads, vias, and the silk layers. And I'll sometimes refer to this as my final view. This is what the board would mostly look like when we get the board back from the board house. But I don't want to have to go in and turn these layers off and on every time just so I can see that. So now that we've got the layers on that we want to see, we can create a new preset view, basically is what it is. So if you go up to the display and right click, you'll see this little menu pop up. Click new, and I'm going to call this final. Then I'm going to click OK. Now let me go and let me turn on all these layers again. Okay, every layer showing up. Now if I right click on this, you can see that final has been added to the list, and when I click on that, it's going to go back and change it to just the layers that we told it to save under that preset. And you can do that with any combination of the layers that you want. Let's say for example that we want the top copper as well as the top and bottom cream. Now we could save this new. We'll call this top cream. If I go back and let's turn on all the layers, for example, and now I right click and select top cream, there we go. It recalls our saved layers for that particular version or for that particular view. So hopefully this will give you a good idea of some manipulation with the layers and help you in your process of laying a board out, especially when it becomes more complex. These functions are very useful. So until next time, thanks a lot.